Have you ever found yourself trapped in a cycle of relationships with men who seem like experts at toying with emotions? Those who enter your life like a whirlwind, mess everything up, then leave behind only fragments of who you once were? The Womanizer, such a common figure in our love stories, carries with him a map of insecurities we rarely allow ourselves to explore. Tonight, as these words glide gently between us, I want to invite you on a different journey. One where you are not the prey, but the observer. Where your tears are no longer shed in vain, but transformed into crystalline wisdom about human nature. The man who collects women like trophies brings with him a universe of vulnerabilities carefully hidden behind confident smiles and seductive glances. His apparent strength is, in fact, a fortress built on sand. And knowing the cracks in that structure isn't about revenge, it's about liberation. When you understand what drives someone, you cease to be driven by him. When you see through the facade, the enchantment dissolves like mist under the morning sun. The deep waters of womanizing behavior aren't as mysterious as they seem. They spring from fundamental insecurities, primal fears, and patterns that, once recognized, lose their power to hurt. And it is this knowledge I wish to share with you now. Remember, true power has never lain in manipulating another human being, but in understanding so profoundly the gears that drive relationships that you become immune to their most common traps. So, settle in, take a deep breath, and allow yourself to absorb every word, not as a battle strategy, but as the key to freeing your heart. 1. The insatiable need for external validation. The man who appears to have all the answers often carries the most fundamental question in his innermost self: am I enough? This ancestral doubt, this abyss of uncertainty at his core, is what drives him to seek tirelessly, in the eyes of different women, the reflection of his own worth. Each new conquest acts like a temporary dose of a remedy that never heals the original wound. You see, external validation is like salt water to someone who is thirsty. The more you drink, the thirstier you become. This fragility was likely born in his earliest relationships of affection, when we learn our value through the eyes of those we love. The boy who didn't receive enough confirmation of his intrinsic worth becomes the man who must constantly prove to himself that he is desirable, capable, extraordinary. The painful paradox is that even after conquering 10, 20, 100 hearts, the doubt persists like a loyal shadow. What if this is the last one? What if after this, no one will ever want me again? This silent fear keeps him in perpetual motion. When you understand that you're not dealing with a confident predator, but with someone as frightened as a child lost in a hall of mirrors, something shifts in your perception. The power he seemed to have over you begins to dissipate. The validation he seeks from you is no different from that which he sought from so many others. Not because you aren't special, but because no external source can ever fill the void he carries. 2. The deep fear of true intimacy. Watch the womanizer's behavior closely, and you will notice a curious pattern. He approaches only up to a certain point, never allowing the connection to cross an invisible boundary. That threshold is the portal to true intimacy, a territory he avoids as if it were a bottomless abyss. Real intimacy demands vulnerability, and vulnerability demands courage. It requires showing yourself completely, with scars, fears, and imperfections. For someone who built his identity on flawless performance and a carefully cultivated image, this is the greatest terror. The fear of intimacy is, at its essence, the fear of being truly known and then rejected. It is safer to maintain multiple, superficial connections than to risk one profound bond. It is safer to be adored from a distance by many than to be truly seen by one. At some point in his life, this man learned that to reveal himself fully is dangerous. Perhaps he witnessed painful relationships, abandonment, or was punished for his vulnerability. He learned to trade depth for breadth, quality for quantity. When he begins to feel that he is being truly seen by you, not just the polished version, he presents to the world, but also his cracks and contradictions. His internal alarm goes off. Closeness becomes a threat, and distance inevitable. Understanding this mechanism is liberating. You realize that your capacity to form genuine connections isn't a weakness, but a strength he lacks. and what seemed like personal rejection reveals itself as the reflection of his own emotional limitations. 3. The illusion of control. As a shield, control is the most valuable currency in the world of the womanizer. Control over your emotions, over others' expectations, over the narratives that unfold. This man carefully orchestrates every interaction to maintain an emotional advantage. This obsessive need for control is not a display of strength. It is evidence of deep fragility, for only those who profoundly fear chaos need to control every variable with such determination. Behind this facade of mastery lies someone terrified that if he loosens the reins even for a moment, everything will collapse. The fear of abandonment, rejection, insignificance, all these ghosts haunt him when he is not in command of the situation. His strategy of multiplying relationships serves this purpose. If one connection threatens to get out of his control, he always has others to fall back on. If a woman begins making emotional demands that unsettle him, he has prearranged escape routes. Control also shows up in how he manages information. You will notice you know very little about him beyond what he's chosen to reveal. Meanwhile, he collects data about you, your dreams, fears, insecurities, storing them as potential tools for manipulation. When you recognize this dynamic, you see that your emotional openness, your ability to navigate uncertainty and vulnerability are not weak points, but signs of an inner strength he has yet to develop. 4. The existential void filled with conquests. At the heart of the womanizer's behavior often lies an existential void, a lack of meaning and purpose he desperately tries to fill with the temporary thrill of new conquests. The relentless pursuit of new partners acts as an effective distraction from this inner emptiness. Each new relationship brings a wave of novelty, adrenaline, and possibilities that temporarily silence the question he avoids asking himself: is this all life has to offer? Existential psychology tells us that humans need meaning just as much as air. When we fail to find that meaning in greater purposes, genuine connections, or personal growth, we seek more immediate substitutes. For this man, the number of conquests becomes a measure of his worth and purpose. Without a reliable internal compass, he depends on the reactions he can elicit from his partners. The sparkle in a woman's eyes when she falls in love, her admiration, her desire, all act as temporary confirmation that he exists and matters. This existential void often has roots in a disconnection from authentic personal values. Perhaps he grew up in an environment where male worth was measured by external achievements, not internal qualities. Or maybe he saw models of masculinity that tied self-worth to the ability to attract multiple partners. When you recognize this pattern, you see that his attention was never really about you specifically. It was about what you represented momentarily in his quest for meaning. This understanding, though painful at first, brings profound liberation. 5. The fragility of the male ego. Masquerading as strength behind the facade of unshakable confidence and calculated charm lies a surprisingly fragile structure, the male ego that drives the womanizer's every move. This fragility is precisely what compels him to seek constant reaffirmations of his worth through new conquests. Psychology teaches us that the more fragile the ego, the more rigid the defenses created to protect it. The man who cannot bear rejection will build elaborate systems to ensure he always rejects first. The one who fears being insufficient seeks quantitative proof. Numbers over depth. This fragility reveals itself in moments of challenge. Watch how he reacts when you aren't available, when you don't respond as expected, or when you set clear boundaries. Disproportionate anger, punitive silence, attempts to provoke jealousy, all are reactions of a threatened ego. The paradox is that while he presents himself as emotionally impenetrable, his internal stability depends entirely on constant external confirmations, like an impressive house of cards that collapses at the slightest gust of wind. This fragility often stems from rigid, limiting definitions of masculinity he has internalized. The idea that men cannot show vulnerability, that they must always be in control, that their value is tied to conquest. These toxic notions create an invisible prison from which he cannot escape. When you grasp this dynamic, you see that what seemed like power over you was, in fact, a desperate armor shielding a terrifyingly vulnerable interior. And with this understanding comes the ability to stop taking his behaviors personally. 6. The paralyzing fear of emotional growth. The sixth, and perhaps most fundamental fragility of the womanizer is his deep, often unconscious terror of true emotional growth. Authentic emotional development requires confronting inner pains, acknowledging destructive patterns, and crucially, change, all processes he avoids at all costs. To grow emotionally, we must first admit our limitations. We must face our shadows, our toxic behaviors, our emotional dependencies. For someone whose identity is built on the illusion of control and invulnerability, this is the greatest terror. Emotional growth also demands relinquishing strategies that, however dysfunctional, are familiar and predictable. The womanizing. Behavior, with all its dysfunction, offers a known map of interactions. He knows exactly how to get quick validation, manipulate to maintain control, and escape when intimacy threatens. Letting go of these strategies would mean navigating unknown territory without the tools he's always used. It would mean learning a new emotional language, developing psychological muscles atrophied by years of neglect. This fear often disguises itself as disdain. He may ridicule emotionally articulate people, mock men who show vulnerability, or devalue conversations about personal growth. This defensive attitude hides not superiority, but terror of his own inadequacy in that area. When you understand this dynamic, you see that your own journey of emotional growth, your willingness to look inward, to change, to seek deeper understanding, is not a weakness to be exploited, but a strength he secretly envies but doesn't know how to cultivate. You may wonder why it seems so hard to let go of such a man. Why, even knowing his patterns, something inside you still wants to stay. Perhaps it's time to reflect on how this dynamic echoes within yourself. And as we make this journey together, I'd like to invite you to become part of our community. Every person who subscribes to this channel brings unique stories, similar wounds, and a remarkable courage to look within. Activate the notification bell and join this circle of women who choose understanding over suffering, growth over mere endurance. Your story and your journey matter deeply to me and to all who gather here. Now, let us return to our exploration of the vulnerabilities that govern the heart of the womanizer. Remember, getting to know these weaknesses isn't about arming yourself for manipulation or revenge. It's not about destroying egos, but about dismantling illusions that keep both you and him trapped in dysfunctional cycles. True freedom comes when you recognize that his behavior was never about your insufficiency, but about his emotional limitations. When you understand that your capacity to love deeply is not a vulnerability to be exploited, but a strength he cannot match in his current state. Maybe you were drawn to this type of man because something in him echoed your own unhealed wounds. Perhaps the dance of approach and withdrawal, the constant promise of something more, replayed familiar patterns from your own history. This recognition, though painful, is the first step to rewriting your emotional future. Attachment psychology teaches us that we often seek in others the chance to heal old wounds. The problem arises when we choose healers who carry the same wounds we try to mend. The womanizer, with his fear of intimacy, his need for external validation, and his terror of emotional growth, cannot offer the solid ground necessary for your emotional flourishing. Realizing this is not defeat, it is liberation. Allow yourself compassion, not only for yourself and the choices you made in the past, but also for him. For he is trapped in patterns that offer only superficial satisfaction while denying what all humans most deeply desire: authentic connection. That compassion, however, does not mean you must stay in relationships that drain your energy and undermine your self-esteem. On the contrary, true compassion recognizes that everyone must walk their own path of growth, and some people will only begin that journey when faced with the consequences of their destructive behaviors. Setting clear boundaries with such a man is not an act of cruelty. It is an invitation for him to confront the weaknesses he has avoided. It is offering him the mirror of reality instead of the distorted reflection he seeks through manipulated reactions. Healthy boundaries begin with deep self-knowledge. When you understand your own values, needs, and limits, it becomes increasingly difficult for anyone to convince you to compromise them in exchange for scraps of affection. The emotional independence you develop in this process is not about needing no one. It's about not needing validation from people incapable of offering authentic love. It's about recognizing your intrinsic worth, independent of the opinions of those who only know how to appraise people as conquests. This is a gradual process. Each time you choose not to respond to a manipulation attempt, each time you uphold your boundaries, even if it means losing his attention, each time you refuse to accept less than you deserve, you strengthen your muscles of self-determination. The emotional defenses you developed to survive dysfunctional relationships, perhaps minimizing your needs, rationalizing unacceptable behaviors, or ignoring warning signs, served you in the past. They allowed you to endure painful situations. Now, with greater awareness, you can gradually replace them with healthier responses based not on fear, but on clarity and self-love. The metamorphosis from a woman repeatedly drawn to emotionally unavailable men into one who attracts and is attracted by genuine connections does not happen overnight. It is a journey of small daily choices, moments of self-awareness, and the courage to feel the discomfort of shifting patterns. On this journey, you will discover that true power never lay in trying to change his behavior, but in transforming your relationship with yourself. As your inner light grows brighter, you will naturally attract people who celebrate rather than fear your shine. You will also realize that true intimacy, one based on mutual vulnerability, shared growth, and deep acceptance, is infinitely more fulfilling than the emotional roller coaster of relationships with emotionally immature people. And perhaps, most importantly, you will discover that your capacity to love deeply, once your greatest perceived vulnerability, is actually your greatest strength. In a world where so many fear emotional depth, your courage to dive into the profound waters of human love is a precious gift. The path ahead will not always be easy. There will be moments of doubt, setbacks, and nostalgia for the familiar dance of approach and withdrawal. In those moments, remember, you are unlearning patterns that may have formed over decades. Be gentle with yourself in the process. Also remember that you are not alone on this journey. Thousands of women walk similar paths, unraveling the same mysteries, healing similar wounds. There is strength in this knowledge, in understanding that your experience, though deeply personal, connects to a larger tapestry of female experience. Setting healthy boundaries with men who display these patterns is not about becoming cold or calculating. On the contrary, it is about preserving your capacity to love fully, directing it toward those who can receive and reciprocate it at the same intensity. At its core, understanding the womanizer's fragilities is less about him and more about you, about reclaiming your power, defining your narrative, and consciously choosing the kind of love you wish to cultivate in your life. By the end of this journey of understanding, you will have gained not only clarity about his patterns, but, more importantly, about your own. You will have developed a more precise internal compass, capable of distinguishing between the superficial sparkle of someone who only wants to conquer you, and the softer, steadier light of someone who can truly walk by your side. And perhaps, most transformative of all, you will have learned that destroying someone's ego was never the real goal. The true purpose was always to build yourself, stronger, more aware, more capable of giving and receiving the love you have always deserved. This ongoing journey of self-discovery and emotional empowerment has no defined endpoint. It is a continual path of expansion, refinement, and evolution. And every step you take in this direction is a victory worthy of celebration. May the insights we've shared here today be seeds planted in the garden of your consciousness. Seeds that, with time and care, will blossom into healthier relationships, clearer boundaries, and unshakable self-love. You, who have made it this far, have already shown courage and commitment to your own growth. Trust in that impulse, in the inner wisdom that has guided you to this moment. It will continue to illuminate your path ahead, revealing new horizons of possibility in your emotional life. Always remember, you are not defined by the relationships you've had, but by the wisdom you've drawn from them and the choices you make from that understanding. And those choices, made with awareness and self-love, have the power to completely rewrite your love story, not only with others, but above all, with yourself.